Manager from MOFAD. Welcome. I suggest turning your cameras off for this. We have you all muted right now, so we can only hear from the speakers. But thank you all so much for joining us. And we're just going to give it a couple more minutes to see who else is going to be joining us. I imagine a few people will be coming in a couple more minutes. So just hang tight with us for a moment. It'll just be about 2 more minutes. So please, if you can, just turn off your cameras and just hang out for a moment and we'll get started. Thanks so much.
Couple people waiting.
Great. Come in.
Hi, everyone. If you're just joining us, we're just giving it another minute to let people in who are coming in a few minutes late. So thanks for your patience. It'll just be about another minute. Thanks so much. I'm glad everyone found the link, had no trouble getting on, I hope. Okay. Great. Well, we are going to get started. If you have your camera on, if you wouldn't mind just turning that off right now. At the bottom, you have a little camera, so you should be able to click that so it has a red line through it, so we're not seeing your video. Great. I think everyone got that. Perfect. Well done. So welcome, everyone. My name is Sari. I'm the Public Programs Manager at MOFAD. Unfortunately, I can't have a conversation seeing you all tonight, but I so appreciate you joining us virtually. This is actually our first online program that we're launching with our partner, Gastro, Obscura. This is the first in a series that we're going to be doing together on Sunday nights, this time exactly, 8 p.m. Eastern Time. This is super exciting to be joining you all wherever you are around the world. I know some of you have been with us in person in New York City, and as disappointing as it is to not be able to come together in community in our space in New York, it is really amazing that we can welcome so many people from all different parts of the world, potentially the country. I don't know exactly where you all are from, but I would love to find out at some point. So I'm super grateful that you are still our audience and you're still with us in this very challenging time when we don't have our exhibition open, and it's wonderful to be able to find ways to still come together. And before I introduce our panelists this evening, I want to just do a couple housekeeping notes with you. Let's see, like I said, this is our first program, so we will have another one next Sunday and then the following Sunday and for several weeks. So if you're not on our newsletter, which you can find on mofad.org, please sign up so you can stay up to date with all of our upcoming programs. We have other things in addition to this series, so we want to make sure that you're updated with us. I do want to let you know that we're recording this program tonight, but since none of you have your video cameras on, none of you will actually be recorded, so not to worry about that. And we are going to be doing a Q&A at the end of the program for the last 15 minutes. So if you have questions for our panelists, please just, write them down, jot them down in a note next to you. And then after the 45 minutes of our panel conversation, we'll let you know that it's time for a Q&A, and we're going to be using the chat function for that. So you'll see a little chat button at the bottom of your screen. So when I say it's time for Q&A, you can click on that chat button, you can type your questions, and then we'll be able to read them that way and respond to them. So I want to quickly pass it over to our partner, Gastro Obscura. So I have Kiki Dolan. She is helping me tonight with this program. She's from the experiences team at Gastro Obscura, and she's just going to say a quick hello.
Hello, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. As Sari said, my name's Kiki, and I'm going to be your moderator for this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to have all of you from all over. I just had somebody chat me saying hello from Sydney, so love to hear that. Just wanted to say a quick thing about Gastro Obscura if you haven't heard of us before. Our mission is to inspire wonder and curiosity about the world through food and drink. Gastro Obscura has articles and videos and guides that help you explore what food and drink reveal about the places where they're made and the people who make them. And in partnership with chefs and historians and other wonderful organizations like MOFAD, Gastro Obscura helps travelers and curious people experience culinary wonders firsthand. So with that, I hope you guys enjoyed tonight's experience. And while the chat is deactivated for everyone to see, you are still able to chat me as the host. If anything is off for you, if you can't hear or anything like that, please let us know and we can help troubleshoot that for you. So with that, I'll hand it back to MOFAD.
Okay, thanks, Kiki. Okay, just want to let you know a little bit about our amazing panelists this evening. As you know, this program is Recipes for Respect, which is the name of the book authored by Dr. Rafia Zafar, which we are so honored to have coming to us all the way from St. Louis this evening. Dr. Zafar is a professor of English and African American Studies and the program in American Culture Studies at Washington University in St. Louis, where she also directs the Mellon Mays Undergraduate Fellowship Program. She is the author of many other major publications, including the 2-volume edition of Harlem Renaissance novels, the Library of America collection. We also have the wonderful Therese Nelson, such a good friend of MOFAD. We're so happy to have her. She is a chef, a writer, and she's the founder of BlackCulinaryHistory.com, a social network and digital archive she started in 2008 as a way to preserve Black heritage throughout the African culinary diaspora, to celebrate and network Black chefs globally, and to steward modern Black foodways into this next generation. So welcome, Therese, welcome, Professor Zafar. I'm gonna hand it over to you, and then I'll see you all in about 45 minutes when we open it up for Q&A.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So first off, I want to say that I am so profoundly excited to be talking about this book. First, because, like Sarah was saying, the African American exhibit is on hold, like the world is on hold. But this program, out of really all the programs that I was going to be involved in, and certainly that are going to be waiting for you all when the exhibit finally opens, was, I think, emblematic of what the spirit of this exhibit really is about. Something about the conceit of using such a broad and interesting take on how to look at Black history through food that you've used in this book is like literally I feel like it's it's the dissertation of what this whole thing is about. So excited about that.
Well, I'm excited about having a conversation with you because you've done great things in terms of making visible in a way that a scholarly book cannot, making visible the contributions past and ongoing of African American chefs. So I thank you for inviting me here.
Okay. So I feel like what I really wanted to start with is your life in words, because your academic life, but also I feel like you're writing your book, your books on the Harlem Renaissance, and my first introduction to your work was actually We Wearing a Mask. And your work, your life in academia, to me, is such, I don't know, the true way of thinking about our culture through words and through authors is so specific. So I would love to be like, sort of give us like your, superhero origin story, like how you came to this space of using words in the way that you do in your life and your work.
Well, that's a tall order. I think, let me see. We Wear the Mask was not my first book even. Like Sari, I actually did not go to grad school right after college. Some of you know that I actually worked for a place that became very famous in the food world, Dean and DeLuca, when it was first a place called The Food Store. and it was usually me and Giorgio in the store. And then he had partners come in, and the cheese store became Dean and DeLuca. I continued to work there after college and again in grad school. My parents were my mom hadn't gone to college. My dad got into Howard and Juilliard, but got drafted. So their idea of their daughter graduating with honors from English at City College and then continuing to work at a food store, this was anathema to them. My mother said, "You come home and you smell like cheese." And I said, "Yeah, it's great. I love it." But I went and worked in book publishing for 6 years, and people kept telling me, I worked at Doubleday and Book of the Month Club. People kept saying, "Are you a teacher? Because you love talking about books." I'd be at parties and telling people about what I'd read. And well, long story short, I ended up going to grad school, and I started wanting to write about the Harlem Renaissance, because I thought, well, there's this Harlem Renaissance, this amazing flowering of African-American literature and art and music and dance, but there had to be a naissance, right? That Renaissance means rebirth. So that's why you read, I'm impressed you've read We Wear the Mask, because my first book was a study of the first 100 years of Black authors from 1760 to 1870, because I said, I know they were Black writers. There were literate Black people in the 19th century. There were literate Black people in the 18th century. In fact, I just taught a grad class last year, and the grad students were just saying, I didn't know all these, there were multiple Black people writing before Frederick Douglass and Harriet Jacobs. And I said, yeah. Anyway, when I was in grad school, I remained interested in food. And if any of you know the historian Nathan Irvin Huggins, who's written a wonderful book, the late Huggins, on African-American history. And I told him I wanted to write on food. And Professor Huggins shook his head and said, "Your second book, Rafia, your second book," right? He was being the PhD advisor. So long, I took a lot of detours. I ended up writing about early African-American literature. I edited books. I wrote a monograph on the Harlem Renaissance, did the Library of America. And all the time I publish a piece of this, like the signifying dish, as an article came out 20 years ago. So I always wanted to do this. And I'd say, oh, this is, literature, people don't get it. But my PhD wasn't in English, but finally I got around to it. And it was the Schomburg, the wonderful Schomburg Center, and the National Endowment for the Humanities that gave me the opportunity to spend a year at the Schomburg and really pull everything together. Yeah. And so that's how this little book got done. I thought it should be bigger after 20 years, but I wanted it to be concise. And I also wanted it to be something that just folks could read. My sister says, well, this is one book of yours I can read.
I mean, that was one of the things I was so struck by, and I think was where I wanted to take our conversation, was really that so much of, at least I found, so much of the work of trying to contextualize our culture through food, in this country specifically, is this detective work where you have to sort of piece together inferences from all these disciplines and all these spaces and use what we know intuitively to be true culturally, but also the little bits of actual provable, provable fact that help us to sort of piece together this amazing puzzle. And so what Recipes does in such a particular way is cover so much time, but uses you can't check receipts. We have these books. This is the source code. You can't, there's nothing to challenge in the literal words, and you are able to sort of help us not digest, but sort of appreciate the breadth of these stories. And so I guess I want to take it to, while we're all here, really to talk about this book. It seems like, to your point, there's such a breadth of just source code, source material to draw from, how did you choose which stories to tell? Because you really were strategic about these 6-7 chapters. I mean, this is really interesting and sort of savvy, like, thought process, but it's particular. This is specific.
Yeah, well, and there was supposed to be an 8th chapter, which is still sort of in pieces, but I just couldn't finish it in time, which would have been another chapter on mid-century, actually on kitchens, and 2 Black women writers, Anne Petrie and Gwendolyn Brooks.
Okay.
Well, one of the things is that I started in the 19th century because that's, where I started professionally. But I was interested not so much in writing a grand unified field history of African American foodways. But since I'm a literary person still, I'm a literary historian, I like to think of myself, I thought I could pull out some representative texts that would provide snapshots of what folks were doing, and then knowing my grandmother was a hairdresser, right? So she was an entrepreneur. So I was very interested in how different because of the structural obstacles for African Americans to move sort of into corporate America or into the law or all sorts of things for many years, the whole notion of being an entrepreneur, having your own business, was really important. Mm-hmm. So these early books were the books of the publications of entrepreneurs, right? People like Abbey Fisher, who I write about, who is a well-known caterer and pickle and jam maker in San Francisco, or Robert Roberts, who was the butler to then Massachusetts Governor Gore. There are people that I don't mention, like Cleora Butler, mm-hmm. Cleora's Kitchens, which is a lovely book. How did people leverage their skills, their skill set, their knowledge, and particularly in a society that was either literally or structurally barred from literacy, mm-hmm. how did they deploy all of these talents to mobilize civil rights and respectability? And respectability, not just in the sense of being bougie, but respectable and being able to have what people thought of as respectable lifestyle, put food on the table, send their children to college, whatever they wanted to do.
1,000,000%. And I think Sayo talks a little bit, but I think I've been on the advisory board for the forthcoming African American exhibit. And this has been 3 years of like hardcore, like stressful, like soulful work of trying to sort of tell this breadth of stories. And I feel sometimes, especially over the last sort of decade or so, a lot of this in the food world, there seems to be this feeling about overstated or sort of I use the word bougie, but like absolutely this sense that we have to be defensive. We sort of have to qualify our agency in this work, and you use sort of James Hemings and Hercules were these professionally trained chefs and these markers of what validates somebody's sort of qualification. Mm-hmm. But from the very introduction of this book, it's so interesting that you talk about this notion of dignity and this notion of sort of self-respect, because so often the service industry, the hospitality industry, historically has been this sort of, once we're able to do better, this is an industry we don't have to be involved in. But the stories you're telling in the sort of, the truth of the matter is that this was the battleground for actual wealth and agency for our culture. Like, you can't divorce the two. And I'm wondering about, because the 2 areas I was most drawn to in the book were really Arturo Schomburg, but absolutely the Harlem Renaissance is sort of a player. And then Vertimae Grossman specifically, but that chapter where you sort of talk about Vertimae in context with the Darden sisters. So I'm interested in that introduction, sort of the how this project came together and how because you do a lot of analysis in these chapters, right? Like, it's not just sort of presenting the works, is almost critically asking us to think more broadly about what these people's lives were and what the context of the time they lived would have meant for their culinary life, for their food life. So I'm wondering, maybe everything before the Harlem Renaissance, what you discovered that you didn't think you maybe knew, or what changed about what you were finding.
Well, it's funny. One of the things I say is I also look at different genres, right? Because cookbooks are a genre, and now they're actually, accepted. They're actually a Library of Congress classification as a genre, as a literary genre, which they didn't used to be, right? But people were using, right? Those entrepreneurs saw publication as a route upwards, as a route to saying, demanding respect. Right, I think it was. I'm trying to remember. It was maybe Jefferson Davis. I'm trying to remember whether I know that from Michael Twitty or from Frederick Douglass Opie. But that Robert Roberts' book on how to run a proper household was actually in the library of one of the Confederate generals.
Right.
I mean, and Simon Gikandi, the scholar at Princeton, has talked about how this is this paradox, right, of Black people who were seen as socially low, actually telling white people, they're the ones who are saying, well, if you want to look genteel, if you want to run a proper household, allow me to tell you how to do this.
Yep.
If you look at Tunis Campbell's, the Hotel Keeper's Guide, and Tunis Campbell, for those of you who don't know, Tunis Campbell was from New Jersey, was a hotel keeper and manager in New York City, wrote a guide, which people could follow. After the Civil War, he went and was a carpetbagger and actually was an elected official. So people will know him as a political actor, but not necessarily as a hospitality entrepreneur. And interestingly, in his second book, in the memoirs of Campbell, he doesn't mention it. He doesn't mention his earlier life. It's like he wanted to keep that life of service, even though it was great. He wanted to keep that in the past. But one of the things that Campbell does, and I gave a paper on it, and maybe my friends in the performance studies love it, and all my books are in another room. I mean, I play show and tell, but he has these great graphs. Well, actually, I think I might have one of them here. He has these great graphs, if folks can see them. Can you see them there, the little graphs? Where he actually, like a choreographer, he designs ways for people to pick up the plates in unison, move around, how to, exit right, exit left. It's not that he was that they didn't have this kind of formal service, but he perfected it. And I make the argument that he also, speaking of analysis, I'm thinking of him not just someone operating in a European context, but also because he grew up in a community of people who were diasporic, but in some of the processions and rituals of people in the West African diaspora. So it's a really interesting palimpsest, right? So on the one hand, you see these well-dressed men, because they were men, right, moving in and out of a dining room in sort of these ritualized movements. But it's not just about service. There's that echo, right? To those in the know, I believe they would be picking up the movements, right? The sort of sacred movements of people in the Black diaspora. So that's one of the examples. They're all, see, that's the thing about food waste, right? It's ephemeral, right? They're works of art, and then we eat them, right? So you can't, how do you put the smell, right, of like sage? How do you put that in a book? How do you put the sort of, you're a chef, right? You need to know that by muscle memory and by your finger, like textures. How do you know that a sauce is gelid enough, right? How do you know when something is, we've got the right combination of ingredients and in the right amounts? So when you're looking at food, I teach a course in African diasporic foodways now. And that's one of the things we talk about, is how do we try to recapture how and what, you know, and then of course, you know, there are ways, right? That's when we look to archaeologists and things like that.
Well, I mean, one of the other amazing takeaways, especially from the first few chapters of the book, and really I think everything that precedes the sort of Harlem Renaissance, is really that the learning part, the sort of best practices, is sort of collecting of all of this wisdom and professional knowledge, then becomes teachable, right? Like, you have to find a way to teach it. You are now sort of bequeathing, like, your children, you know, this is a pathway for them to be, you know, for employment, all those sort of tools that they're going to need to sort of operate in this world, in this, you know, changing, you know, complicated world. These are tools that you're arming them with in a lot of ways. I've been fascinated by the Harlem Renaissance since I was in high school. I have loved, there's something about because I feel like sometimes in our culture, it's like this sense that, and maybe not our culture, but our country's history sort of we try to pretend that like 1865, all of a sudden the world changed, and like, you know, sort of freedom brings, that there was a switch flip. And we know that's not the case, but it's something about the Harlem Renaissance to me that feels so right in this notion of like, how far removed are you from this metaphorical switch being flipped? But then you migrate, and all of a sudden Harlem becomes this emblem, this sort of like beacon of just like Black dopeness. It just becomes this moment of, what do we do free? Like, what do we do artistically? How are we going to define ourselves outside of, like, in this new context? It's just so right for time. And I feel sometimes when I'm talking to my peers now in food spaces, that like, we are in this sort of kinetic moment that feels like what you hear or think about, or sort of our signal to that era was about. I mean, you don't have, you know, Arturo Schomburg. You don't have like that idea of, I don't know, just, but not even wealth. So I'm not even attracted to the idea of mobility financially, but this idea about this notion of ideas, and this right moment of just thinkers just feeding off one another. And so you are the authority on the Renaissance, and I'm wondering.
I wouldn't call me the authority. There are scholars recently passed, Cheryl Wall, who was a wonderful, wonderful scholar at Rutgers. Cheryl did the Library of America, Zora Neale Hurston. She's written on women of the Harlem Renaissance. I'd say I would give my props to Cheryl first, but I've done a little work on the Harlem Renaissance. I think it's, you know, two things. Well, there are many things, but when you talk to people about the Negro Renaissance, folks, particularly folks who are from Chicago or DC, they often get kind of huffy, right? When you say Harlem Renaissance, they say, it's all, you know, not everybody was in Harlem. And I say, that's true. Rudolph Fisher, you know, was at Brown. He was a DC guy. Georgia Douglas Johnson was in DC. There are people in Chicago. I said, but I think of Harlem, yes, as a space where everyone had to come through, at least briefly. I mean, Zora Neale Hurston was a Florida person. She was there for a while. She went to college, obviously she went to Barnard and Columbia, but then she lived the rest of her life after her many travels in Florida. But Harlem was a metaphor, right, for the Black New World, for the Black North American world. And it was a diaspora, right? Claude McKay was from Jamaica. Let me see, I think Eric Walrond, I think, was from Panama. I mean, people were from all over the world, right? All over the Black world. And it was just, even if it was in some ways more symbolic than literal, people thought of Harlem as this place. If it wasn't just a physical space, it was a metaphoric place, right? One of the great short stories I was thinking of as you were talking was Rudolph Fisher, who was from Rhode Island and DC. and also was a physician, one of the many Renaissance personalities of the Harlem Renaissance. He wrote a great story called The City of Refuge, and it describes this country bumpkin coming up, getting into trouble in Harlem. I won't, no plot spoilers here, but at the end he's arrested by a black cop. And to him, this is the apotheosis of the second coming. I'm being arrested by a black cop. It's like, okay, here I am. They're black drivers, black police officers, black businesses, right? Okay, if I'm going to get into trouble, might as well be in Harlem, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
So much of what you find in cookbooks and manuals and the writing that you cover in your book, certainly, but that you just find in research and reading lots of books, is that the culinary identity or the sort of culinary language was almost to your point about this sort of signal about like your station in life, like your taste level, like your class level. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, with the idea, I mean, you're thinking about Lily Walker. I'm thinking about just this sort of sense of this, I don't know, this burgeoning new sort of Black wealth, this Black mobility. Mm-hmm. What did food say about, like, within community during that era? Like, what were people, how were people sort of using that signal within community?
Well, one of the great, Tony Tippin Martin, who I think at one point we're hoping to have join our conversation. She's the cookbook queen. I mean, not only she wrote that beautiful cookbook, Jubilee, but the
Jemima Code.
Yeah, it's here. The Jemima Code, right? I mean, she has such an amazing collection. And one of the cookbooks, I'm trying to remember, I think it was from a Federation of California Cooks. And it's from around that period. And basically, there are no Black foods, right? The middle class wanted to appear middle class American, right? That was important. George Schuyler was a satirist, another Harlem Renaissance person. And George Schuyler infamously had this dust up, this beef with Langston Hughes in the pages of The Nation about how the Black middle class was really just middle class, and race wasn't salient. Langston Hughes took him to task on that. But basically, he said we eat the same breakfast, we sleep in the same bed frames made by X. We all wake up to like West clocks. So there was this notion that there was going to be a move, the rising of the middle class would help everyone else. Mm-hmm. But that, that's, as Langston Hughes snarkily said, about regular folks, he said, what did they, to paraphrase, what did they care about the Harlem Renaissance? And if they did know about it, it hadn't raised their wages any, right? So pointing out that Harlem might have people like W.E.B. Du Bois and Jesse Fawcett walking down the street as editors of the Crisis. But, the man on the street, they're still, if we're thinking about yams, right? They might have hot yams. They're not all like, Bigfoot, the Pigfoot lady who translated, right? Pigfoot Mary, who translated her knowledge of the Southern food that people craved into what we would now think about a food truck, except her food truck was a baby carriage at the beginning.
That's right.
And then she deployed it into being a real estate baron in Harlem by saving her pennies, right? But also knowing how to cook and knowing how to serve the community. What is the community lacking, right? And it's that taste of home. Think about Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, when he's wandering that nightmarish journey through Harlem and the riots, and he then gets the hot yam, and it's like, I am what I am. It was that taste of home, right? Yeah. That is, and I think I first read that in an essay by Jessica Harris that was in Gourmet a long time ago. And she talked about the two streams of African American. She said, I don't know whether she called it the cuisine of the quarters and the cuisine of the big house. That if African Americans have to code switch between our people and the larger people, you can think of in cuisine, Black folks code switched also, right? You might have the cuisine, right? The Italians call it la cucina povera, right? The food that just the regular people who don't have much make and it's delicious, or the cuisine of the wealthy where you can get, I don't know, pheasant tongues and saffron or whatever, and might be able to make two delicious dishes, but the ingredients will tell you what the background of the chefs who are making those two dishes.
That's right. I mean, that makes me, I'm always I vacillate between lamenting the fact that we don't seem to have learned a lot from history in some ways, that we still have the issue of code switch and the issue of sort of where we place center even now, in the way we present our work, the way we define ourselves as chefs, the way the food space places its priorities. I mean, the world stopped and our industry imploded. To me, that signals that something else was a wrong or sort of sick before all of this. So it's interesting that we have these really particular lessons from literature, from the culture that is right here for us. It's telling us that there's no there, and we don't seem to be listening, but that's a whole other lament. I want to talk about Schomburg because I'm in Harlem. I mean, I grew up in North New Jersey, but I've lived in Harlem for the last 8 years.
Hamilton Terrace, City College of New York graduate.
And like the ability to go over to that space and to be in that building. I mean, even if like sometimes I just go over just to, have my lunch or just, write, just to be in that space.
First Fridays.
That's right. There's something about that. There's something about that place. And I wonder because something about the chapter we talk about Schomburg's manuscript, but certainly in a larger context, his forethought about preserving and thinking critically about how to contextualize our culture is literally the game changer. It's literally, I mean, we don't have so many of the resources that we have as researchers, as thinkers, without his forethought. And I'm wondering your time at the Schomburg, and certainly the chapter and recipes that really delves into his thought process about the power of food as a signal to our culture. So it was the most powerful chapter for me. So I wonder if you could just talk about him a little.
But in some ways, I felt possessed by Schomburg when I was there. I mean, I had started my academic career at the Schomburg when I had started grad school, and I thought that I was going to write on the Harlem Renaissance for my dissertation. So, and I did put that aside. But the only copy of Jessie Fawcett's Plum Bun that you could get at the time was in the Schomburg. It was a non-circulating copy. So I used to go to the old Schomburg. This is in the early 80s, before the fancy new building, and do my reading there. So when I went back as a scholar, a scholar in residence, that was so gratifying, satisfying, and it also made me feel like I made it. I went from being a student here to a scholar who could be asked to be in residence. And his papers are there. You can go to the reading room, and there'll be like a sculpture by Richmond Barthé that Schomburg himself collected. I mean, his spirit, his presence is everywhere. But I knew about that cookbook, the cookbook proposal in his papers, so I wanted to look at that because it was curious. I mean, what was Schomburg saying about cookbooks before people were really, the sort of the big, let's see, it's around 1962 or so that Leroy Jones writes Soul Food, the essay Soul Food. And then we start seeing, like in the 70s and 80s, Jessica Harris starts publishing, then cookbooks like Edna Lewis's cookbooks, John Pinderhughes. I mean, a lot of people start publishing books. But Schomburg, when I got into the papers, I was just so puzzled, because this is a man who was an Afro-Puerto Rican, a proud Afro-Puerto Rican. And there's actually relatively little diasporic meals. Tony Tippy Martin's done a great job, like teasing out some, but there are these like tantalizing references, like to would be like the fish that the Juca people would eat, or he'd say something like Cuban onion, just these throwaways. And because this was just a proposal, you have to fill in so much. I think the fact that most of the recipes that are listed are either Southern or just American, North American, Southern, meaning the Southern state. I think it might have had something to do with gender. That is, he was a man of his era. He was married 3 times. It was very tragic. He lost his first 2 wives, but all of them were African American. So the cuisine he ate probably at home, prepared by his wife, would have been American food, unless there were some dainties she might have made for him. And that I think would impact the kind of recipes he might choose. There's that tantalizing little memoir at the beginning where he talks about being in New Orleans and beignets and how beautiful it is and coffee. And you just think, this man loved to live. He loved people. He loved eating. There's just a glimpse of the person behind the man who would write about why they trying to whiten up Francis Tavern, Samuel Francis, right? The Francis Tavern is still downtown. Or he would mention chefs. But curiously, there is no mention of people he must have known about, like George Crumb, who was a restaurateur in upstate New York, in Saratoga, who is often credited with inventing the potato chip. Now, potato chips were around, but Crumb, he popularized them, right? He made them like nobody else. So it's attached to him. So it is curious. Did he do it because he just thought this was interesting? When I worked with the librarians at the Schomburg, we could not find, and in the core library, you can find many books that have the Schomburg place, the face plate in it, the book plate. We could not find any cookbooks that had his book plate in them. The one copy, the one recipe, the Lafcadia Hearn, the library of the gumbo recipe, that's the only complete recipe that's included in the proposal. That comes from La Cuisine Creole. And the only copy that the original copy is in the main library on 42nd Street. It's possible it was transferred over there, but the record keeping, right, we're still not sure exactly which books in the collection were given by Schomburg. And by the same token, this could happen with cookbooks. Were there cookbooks that the librarians after his death in the 40s and the 50s, well, this is serious African-American history and literature. Oh, we don't need these cookbooks. We don't know. We don't know. There's a Tunis Campbell, a copy of the original Tunis Campbell, but it's not clear at all when it was acquired and whether it was Schomburg. He doesn't mention him in the proposal.
Yeah, I think I feel like, so this takes me to the last, because we have about 5 minutes left before Q&A, but it takes me to this, so much, I think we canonize people in a way sometimes that isn't, not so much it's not fair, but it's interesting. Anna Lewis's sister said to me once that she was interested in how people like sort of put Miss Lewis on this pedestal, but it's forgetting that she was a human person and had all of these interesting, disparate things that we don't think about when we think about the Grand Dame, right? We think about Schomburg and there's so much that we put on the Renaissance and put on that era. But there's a lot that your book asks us to think about critically. Like, yeah, we can romanticize these moments and these people and these, brilliant thinkers, but they were human people who were flawed, who had all kinds of, societal issues. And so thinking about them more with more humanity and more grace maybe is a smarter way to think. The last area I wanted to talk to you about, really because I'm so fascinated by her and I think so highly of her work, is Vernon Grosvenor. When we posted about this, her daughter reached out and was like, I think she was talking about.
My mama cooked like Aretha Franklin sing.
That's right.
Was it Chandra who contacted you?
Yeah, she was. I don't think she had a reference for what doc was going to be about. She just wanted to make sure we talked about her mom, and I think.
Oh yeah. How can you not?
Right. How you honor her in this book is so beautiful. So I would love for you just to because people need to understand how just fully formed and spectacular Dr. Grosvenor was. So I would love for you to talk about
She is great. I'm holding this book up. This is my first edition, which my sister gave to me when my book came out last year. Because one of the things she and I laughed about, she had a copy of this when it came out. My friend Robin had a copy, and it is one of those cookbooks that walk. People will say, "Oh, can I borrow that? I just love the Raymond Saint Jacques pancakes," yep. And that's the last time you ever see that cookbook. Yep. So getting a copy, my sister wanted to. She admitted she bought it for herself, but then when I said, "Oh," she said, "Right, this belongs to you." Verna May is a really fascinating character for a lot of reasons. She was a performer. She performed with Sun Ra Orchestra, so we can say now that she was an Afrofuturist.
That's right.
She was a performer in the sense of became an NPR commentator and had a cookbook or a cooking thing going on. She wrote and actually one of my grad students is writing on her as someone who wrote about women and labor and the racialized nature of work. She was a big thinker. And often people who are funny, right, and tell jokes and do certain things are discounted, right? She's saying serious things about work, the nature of work. She's saying serious things about what she would call the segregation of ingredients in the supermarket. But because she's jokey, and also because of the way we lit crit people would say, the bricolage of her cookbook, right? It's got letters, it's got recipes, it's got asides, first person voice, different kinds of voices. People don't see her as, she's funnin', but she's quite serious. She's quite serious about what she knows is a genuine American art form. And she says pretty much straight out that early in the book, that cooking is something, as she says, you do by vibration, right? It's something that you perform and you create the way that a painter would, the way that a musician would. I think she would probably say that if you're looking at an analogous creative genre, she would say her cooking, right? Like her daughter said, my mother cooked like Aretha Franklin sings. She would see cooking and music as sort of these preternaturally Black things that she does or did.
I mean, honestly, she's the person that I like, especially when, that's something about a 17-year-old thinking about coming to this work. She's the person, I think sometimes, again, Miss Lewis is someone that I was drawn to as a teenager to come to this work. But when I found Verna May, there's something about the just fully luxuriated Blackness of her presence that gave me license, I feel, to think about why I wasn't infusing my identity into my own work. And so it's just something about that kind of, something about that, wrapping these babies up in that kind of Blackness is so critical. So it's like the initial book, like, okay, if you can get into this, then I can talk to you, help you with what you want to do next.
Yeah. She was unashamedly and proudly Geechee. as she would
That's
say,
right.
right? It's the travel notes of a Geechee girl.
That's right.
She was 6 foot tall, and she was Black, and she was an artist. And if you didn't like it, that's your problem. Wasn't hers.
Right. That's right. Such an interesting place to stop. I think we, sorry, I don't know if you have questions.
Yeah, so this is a chance for everyone. If you have questions, you can chat them. There's a little chat.
Ooh, chat box.
There's a chat box
Ooh,
at the bottom. Yep, the chat is open. So go ahead and chat your questions, and then as they come up, I will read them to Therese and to Rafia. And while you're coming up with questions, I just want to say thank you so much for that.
Oh, thank you both.
Really rich conversation. I put up the link to Verta May's book, but now I'm just going to put up the link also to Professor Rafia's book as well, which interestingly enough is the same publisher.
Oh, University of Georgia does great food books. One of the great Black women food writers, Psyche Williams-Forson, edited the series that my book came in. So they look, and I noticed that you had Andrew Warnes's book on barbecue on your website, right? And that's a UGA Press book. That look, if you guys are interested, you should check out the press for books on food. They have a nice list.
Yeah, great. And we also put the link to buy your book directly from the publisher on our calendar for the events page. So we certainly encourage you to go out and get Dr. Zafar's book, which you now know is unbelievably fascinating and uncovers all of these untold stories that are so important. To the point that Therese made, is sort of the ethos of the exhibition, African/American, which MOFAD did not open when we were intended to, but
it will open.
But it will open when we are all resume whatever life is when we are on the other side of this. So we have a question from Juanette Clyde. CUNY grad and librarian here. We have culinary programs within CUNY. Have you discovered interesting links to CUNY culinary history? Great question.
No, it is a great question. Not to kill the, there is the late lamented Finley Snack Bar, if any of you went to City College in the 70s. And I don't think City College's food is a lot better, but they were infamous for their egg rolls, and I'll leave it at that. But no, I actually haven't studied that, but I would be interested. I know that CUNY is doing cool things like having food banks for students who are stressed, students and staff who might need it and might, I think, if I was reading my alumni newsletter correctly, that might even be available now because a lot of folks are having trouble with food, getting food on the table. But I haven't done it specifically of CUNY culinary history. An interesting thing, because CUNY was a non-resident college, or CCNY, and I'm assuming many of the others, that you wouldn't necessarily have be able to talk to people who worked in food there. I know that there are some culinary and food classes at school, but those I think arrived long after I graduated. But that's a great subject. We say, great subject for you grad students.
Cool. We have, sorry, did you want to speak to it?
No, okay.
Okay. Are you sure?
Do you have a question?
There's another question, but if you have something.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I think this question is probably for both of you to answer individually. This is a great question from Emily Berger. What foods or recipes are bringing you joy during quarantine? Love to hear the answer of this for both of you.
Ooh, what foods are bringing us joy? Well, full disclosure, I like to say this, is that I think about food, but my husband usually cooks it. So I like to pickle things. I like sauerkraut. I like making my own yogurt. But I had one of my neighbors around the corner say, "You have got to eat the pork chops recipe in Jubilee," in the new Tipton Martin, and I thought, well, I'm not a big pork chop eater, but the deceitful pork chop, as the Du Boisians would call it. But I don't know. I mean, one of the issues we have in our house is that our 27-year-old, who is now living with us, is a vegetarian. So we can kind of have a schizophrenic, there's a lot of pasta and grain dishes, because then we can add some meat or fish, and he can have tofu or beans with him. So I think in general, though, if it's food, we had meatloaf. I roasted a chicken. I love roasting a chicken in a big cast iron pot. Cut a lot of onions thick, maybe turnips, and put the chicken like with lemon and sage, and just put it in the oven and just let it roast in that pan, and it's good. That's something that gives me joy, because then you can eat from it. I'm gonna have chicken salad tonight with preserved lemons, and I preserve the lemons.
Delicious. For me, I mean, I'm still working, so I mean, I'm still 2 clients now, and thinking more.
Working as a chef.
Yeah, definitely. My 2 private clients is really interesting, sort of watching them transition to being at home and eating more at home during the day, because I mean, I was doing a lot of like meal prep and then a lot of dinner parties, so that's over. So transitioning into like really being thoughtful about being home all day and 3 meals in home is interesting. But even in my own life, I mean, I was working, I'm much more slowed down now, but actually having the time to think about meals and actually buy groceries and plan it out has been interesting this couple of weeks.
Yeah, you start, forget, I mean, your brain starts freezing after a while, like 3 squares, every day in and day out. And but I made some nice scones the other day. I made corn muffins yesterday. Not too sweet. My husband warned our son. So these are not sweet corn muffins. So they're just good corn muffins.
That sounds great. You're making me a little hungry. Okay, we have a question from R. Johnson. Is there a traveling plan for the exhibit? We in the Midwest would love to experience it, and there are many who need the experience. So I guess that's a question for me.
Yeah, it is. We want it in St. Louis.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. Thank you for asking about the exhibition. There's no specific plan yet, but absolutely the intention has always been to open the exhibition at the Africa Center in New York City for 6 months first. The Africa Center is in Harlem, right at 110th, right at the top of Central Park on the east side. And then after the run of the exhibition for 6 months, the plan is to travel it around the country. So, our intention and our hope now is just to get it open in New York. And we will plan on doing that whenever it feels safe, and then we'll start working on the plan for after that, because absolutely these stories are so important, and we want everyone to be able to experience this. And if you are writing a question, I should add, I would love to hear where you're from. So you could put that in your chat. It's so nice to hear that there's someone from the Midwest, because like I said at the beginning, it's so great to be able to gather with people all over the country, which normally we can't do in New York. So we have one more question. We have a few more questions actually, this is from Hyundai. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Which fellow cookbook author is your biggest influence? So I'm guessing that's a question for both of you as well.
Well, Therese, you want to go? I mean, I'm kind of a 2 minds of the ones I like to cook with, and then the ones who teach me a lot. Right, and sometimes they overlap and sometimes they don't.
I mean, it seems, I think so many of us think about Miss Lewis and think about taste, but In Pursuit of Flavor is actually my favorite of her books.
Yeah.
It was so, excuse me, I think it was Sarah Franklin's program, but we had this conversation in MOFAD months ago about Miss Lewis and her age. And sometimes I think people don't realize some of the deference and sort of the realness people associate with her was really also partly because of her age. I mean, she was not this, kid in these streets. She had been working for so long, and when her book came out, I mean, I think her co-writer for Pursuit was on the panel with us. And she was talking about how like her function was really to type for Miss Lewis at that time. Because like she was just, she was the grand dame. She was older, and you just type as I talk because I'm so dope and brilliant. I think people don't really understand how subversive is how brilliant she was. But if you read Miss Lewis, I feel like you have to read Verna May as well. Like the two of them together give you this perfect way to center, at least for me, the two of those authors, but I mean, all of their books really sort of told me how to trust myself and trust our culture and the work I was trying to do. It's hard because, I mean, people talk about cookbooks, and I'm not like a cookbook person. I have tons of cookbooks all the time because I do this professionally. Like, I'm drawn from my own thoughts and sort of taste. But certainly those two women just were so clear-eyed about how they wanted to move in the world and how they wanted to translate our culture to people. And it's so empowering.
Yeah. I'm capping that. That's absolutely the case. And I think maybe if I had to pick one scholar, I mean, I'd probably go to Jessica Harris because she's kind of started me off, right? I have my little show and tell here. So I have my little hardcover from the late 80s, right? Iron Pots and Wooden Spoons. And she's also was CUNY faculty. And she's written many books. Many have become more popular. But she really showed me, I mean, and her books have recipes, but she showed me how you can really think critically about food, but also express the pleasure of it by writing recipes. So I want to give props to Jessica Harris too.
I mean, honestly, like, because I feel like I started my site around 2008, 2009. And it was I remember having like a Word document, like trying to look this timeline, trying to plot out these, like all this information that I was finding, how to put it in chronological order, but also in contextual order. And when How the Hog came out, it like changed, it rocked the world, right? It was 13 stories and her voice that sort of told us the truth of our sort of like full-throated like authority in this work. And I just want to say, because I mean, again, I revere Dr. Harris. I have had the pleasure of being in her ether, talking to her. She's the lead curator for MOFAD exhibit. Mm-hmm. She is.
Thank you, Trace.
So much of what your book does, I feel like she laid this foundation, and so then Michael's book comes out, like Cooking Gene comes and lays this, like it's the post and beams, and Hog and Harmony from Fred Opie becomes like cement. But this, I'm telling you, Dr. Zafar, your recipe, I'm hoping people will go and buy this immediately if they've not already, because it lays this other layer, this necessary layer. And we don't have a lot of time left. I mean, I'm so interested in your academic point of reference, but also your publishing point of reference, where there's this ability and latitude for this kind of thinking within the context of Black foodways. How are we talking about our food culture, our foodways, and publishing is the game change. And I'm wondering if you have a sense of whether this is the beginning of more to come, or is this like, do you find it hard? Is it hard to get your stories told, stories you really want to tell? How much imagination do you think publishing has?
I think it's a bit of both. But I also thought, I said there's that left out chapter, so I don't know whether I'll ever get back to it. But I think a lot of I was in an English department I've always been in English departments, but my PhD is actually in American Studies. So I always think I'd like to approach things by the way I think they help, by the things that help you read them. So in reading a recipe, you can read the world, right? And that's one of the jokes, sort of the puns I say in signifying dish. In writing a recipe, can you write history, right? Can you make history correct? And that's kind of what my work is. If you think of a thread in my work, I look at the different ways that African Americans are, becoming intellectuals, being intellectuals, practicing their culture in different ways, whether it's writing poems like Phyllis Wheatley. Yeah, my next project is going to be different, I know, but I'm always going to be interested in food. And my students really these days, even if when I ask my question at the beginning of class, how many students have drunk pot liquor? Every year there are fewer students who know what I'm talking about, and then I have to explain it, which is talk about like the lost, right? The sankofa, right? If you don't know about, you drink that pot liquor and then you can go forward.
That's right. That's perfect. Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Zafar. This has been brilliant.
Thank you. This is a great pleasure. You were making me blush. I could feel my ears hurting.
Great. Well, the last question, actually, you sort of just answered it, but it's for both of you, and it's from Lisa from Chicago, and she asks, how does your research inform future projects? And you did kind of just touch on that, Dr. Zafar, but if you want to let us know anything specifically that you're working on, and Therese, I'd love to hear from you as well.
Ooh, well, it's always that, that's the thing that people ask you at cocktail parties when we have non-virtual cocktail parties at hotels. What are you working on? Well, right now I'm actually thinking about memoir, an African-American memoir. And they're interesting people. Actually, Cheryl Wall, again, she just published right before she passed a collection, a book on the African-American essay. So I want to start with that as a touch point, because I'm really interested in recent memoir, right? If they think, people have certainly said when I was a grad student that the text of Black literature is the slave narrative. I'm kind of interested in, it's not like there is a slave narrative now, but I'm kind of interested in what's the text right now in contemporary Black literature. And I'm not really sure, I'm just in the reading phase, so I don't have anything I actually don't have anything that's in the canon. It's all just in the thought. It's in the thought zone.
I also just got a message from one of our guests that I think more of the attendees tonight will probably want to know, but we'd love to be able to send kind of a list of some of the books that were mentioned tonight. If people want to be able to purchase themselves. So for anybody else interested in that, MOFAD and Gastro Obscura will coordinate and make sure we get a follow-up sent out to you guys with some recommendations.
Yeah.
So on my website, I have 8 sections of reading lists of all dope things you should be reading. This time at home has been interesting. Needs updated ton over the last year or so, but my site really lists as sort of this hub for all those, everything I'm curious about and reading and think is interesting. So there are 8 reading lists on the site, video lists, etc. So.
Trace, just remind us, tell us the link of your website, the URL.
Yeah.
Sure. It's www.blackculinaryhistory.com.
Yeah, perfect.
Lived there for a little while.
Yeah, it's an amazing website, and you all should be going there regardless. So with that, I wanna thank you both so much. I cannot think of a better way to kick off this online program. It was wonderful to be with you all. There's someone here from Japan. How cool is that?
Oh, wow.
So
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So this was wonderful and just so warm and rich. And I learned so much from both of you always. So I'm so grateful to be here with you, even though we can't be together. I feel like we are together, and all of you who tuned in, I feel the same. I feel you through the screen. So thank you for joining us at MOFAD virtually. Please come back next week. We have another program. It's with Charlotte Druckman. She's the author of a new cookbook called Kitchen Remix. She'll be in conversation with Paula Forbes, who's a wonderful kind of cookbook scholar. So check out the MOFAD website, check out Gastro Obscura's website, and most of all, everyone, please just stay safe, stay home, stay with us online, and just sending lots of love and warmth to all of you. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I can do my little, like, the little thumbs up here, right? Reaction, see?
Oh, nice. Okay.
Okay. Woo.
Yay.
Hey.
Okay.
All right. So,
Bye.
bye.